Good evening and welcome to the SharpDevelop Q&A webcast tonight. With me here at the table with one mic, we got Daniel, we got David and Mike, and on tap we got Siegfried and Peter, who can join us if questions arise that pertain to their specific area of interest. And we'd like to begin with a couple of topics on our own, especially talking about the roadmap for SharpDevelop, what we've been working on the past 2 days here in Bad Ischl, and what sort of feature decisions, architecture decisions we have taken, the road forward for our 4.0 version branches, 5.0 version branches, what to expect in this area. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Daniel to show us the roadmap blog post that I wrote in March. So we can talk a bit about what kind of versions you can expect in the future and what sort of features you can expect in those versions. Daniel, can you please share your browser?
Yes.
That's loading. That's nice. So that's the detailed roadmap for SharpDevelop version 5. And could you please go back to the community server for us, where I wrote the blog post on the 4x and 5x version differences. So we can actually take a first look at the version 4 and then take a look at the version 5. So you have to scroll down a little bit because it was in March. Platform roadmap. Yeah, there it is. Now, we detailed in this blog post for version 4, our main reason was we wanted to stick with .NET 4.0 because .NET 4.0 is supported on Windows XP, and version 4.5 of the .NET framework won't be. And we want to take advantage of features that are in version 4.5 for our new development work. So that's why we decided, with our release of version 4.2, that there will be one more feature release of SharpDevelop 4, which will be 4.3. And moving on then, there will be 5, which at the moment is mostly a rewrite based on nRefactory, and there will be some new features. We haven't decided yet which features, but those will come in later. And so if you're an XP user, you will be stuck with version 4. And we will have service releases with new NuGet releases, Subversion library releases, etc. But there won't be any new feature or major bug fixes past version 4.3. So you will be stuck in the 4X series. So if you want to take part in our 5.0 journey, you will have to move up to a newer operating system in the next year. So that's the deal you have to come up with and help us get going. So that's the status for Windows XP. And with that, I want to turn it over to Daniel and talk a little bit about where we are with SharpDevelop 5 today. And well, Daniel, can we use SharpDevelop 5 today for your everyday software development task as an end user, let's say?
No, you can't do that yet. We are currently still working on porting most of the existing code base to the new library, and there are a lot of features that are completely disabled. We have only a couple of add-ins currently in version 5, and most of the built-in features are disabled, and there's also a lot of functionality that will just throw a not implemented exception.
So it's not usable for Joe average developer. That's what I thought. What's going to be our plan for moving forward? When will end users be able to really productively play with SharpDevelop? So what's going to be our first release that we are planning to do?
Yeah, we are planning for our first release, we will only support the C# language. Yeah, this is because that's the only backend binding, the only language binding we have started working on so far. And
then, well, maybe moving on, we will be adding other additional languages and I take it from our discussions that was we're going to first move in those languages that have less requirements on code work, which are our iron languages, as well as possibly F#, I'd say. And I guess that's the beta timeframe.
Yes.
Yeah. And, well, which brings us to one language we were not talking about so far. That was VB. What's happening with VB? Why are we postponing VB past the beta 1 timeframe? What's the reason for it?
Yeah, the big change in SharpDevelop 5 is a move from NWFactory 4 to NWFactory 5, and so far NWFactory 5 only supports C#. And yeah, we will have to
come up with a solution.
Yeah, so in the next time we plan to use the existing VB support from NWFactory 4, but change the resolver semantic analysis logic to use a new type system in NWFactory 5. Since you can have projects of different languages in one solution and they can reference each other, so there must be a single type system, and that's going to be the new one. And until that work is done, we will not have VB support in the first preview, and yeah,
so this will take some time, and this sounds like a lot of stuff moving around in SharpDevelop when we say, okay, new type system, lots of things are changing. Are there any other low-level architecture changes? Because there are a couple of SharpDevelop for application users out there that are using SharpDevelop as their kind of IDE for their app. So does this affect them also, those architectural changes?
SharpDevelop for applications still exists, even though the assembly has been removed, but that's because we moved those features into SharpDevelop exe itself to reduce the number of projects we have and the number of libraries that are around.
So basically, although there is no separate assembly that says .sda.dll, the functionality is still there.
It's still there.
So that's great. And I'll add one user question to that, because that comes up once every couple of months. That's, can you use SharpDevelop for application as a kind of user control in your application, in your process?
No, that's currently not possible. The SharpDevelop workbench needs to be a main window, and needs to be a top-level window and has its own main menu, and you currently cannot integrate that in a bigger window in some other application. The other application has to bring SharpDevelop up as a separate window.
I'll add one more comment to that. The same thing isn't possible with the debugger. It's not possible to actually integrate the debugger within your application and use some scripting language or use it to debug your C# scripts. One constraint of the debugger is that it has to debug something in another process. So you definitely need at least 2 programs to do any kind of debugging.
So yes, there are good technical reasons why that's not possible at all. There's one thing that we've been doing over the weekend so far, that's taking the old XML forms that Mike initially came up with, which was XAML Lite, let's say, before XAML was even invented. And this has proliferated across SharpDevelop, and we're kind of now taking all those old XML forms and moving them to WPF. That effort is being spearheaded by Peter, and we're now at the point where we are starting to merge the first of those conversions into SharpDevelop. So what's our plan going forward when that initial merge has happened?
Yeah, so we plan to do the initial merge into version 4.3, which is mostly updating the project options dialog and also a few of other option dialogues. And yeah, the remaining changes, anything that's not finished at this point of time, we'll have to wait for version 5.0. So we will still support XML forms in 4.3, even though we greatly reduce our own usage of them. and in version 5.0 we will drop support, and if you have any of your own add-ins, you will have to move away from XML forms.
Let's talk a bit about why we stopped porting in 4.3. Because, well, we could have continued porting in 4.3, and we had an interesting discussion also with David on the debugger side of things, why we don't continue working on version 4. And I think that was about the effort it takes to merge the stuff back to 5. So let's talk about a bit of the architecture changes, like services to interfaces, etc. The bigger picture changes, because a lot of add-in developers might as well be interested in that.
Yeah, there are some really major changes. For one thing, we got rid of an adapter layer for the text editor abstraction and have moved this to the in-refactory library, which allows us to share it with all the refactoring logic. So that's a big change in almost all the code that communicates with the text editor. And then the other part is that we try to get rid of the static services that are spread throughout the main SharpDevelop code base and create interfaces for those, which is mainly useful for our own usage so that we can mock them for our unit tests.
Sounds like a lot of work, and that seems to be, besides in-refactory, one of the major things. That means we need to rewrite almost everything that's in there already to make provisions for this change, right?
Yeah, so the main problem with this change is that it causes in the add-ins a lot of single line changes, where previously it was calling a static method. It now has to retrieve an instance and call the method there, but it's a really small and easy change, but it will cause merge conflicts if that code changes in the old version.
Yeah, and I recall you said last time around it took you almost 2 hours to do a rather smaller merge from 4.3 to 5. And this will only get worse if time continues. So that's why we took the decision to stop the WPFization of our old XML forms and continue with this only in 5.0. Speaking of 5.0, there are a couple of changes currently going on. Windows 8 is at the release preview stage, and there's a totally new application model, the immersive applications, which are sometimes called Metro-style apps. Are we going to support those Metro apps? Is there a timeline for it? What sort of problems do we expect, and when will users get their hand on this?
Yeah, so it depends on what kind of support do you expect. Do you want a visual designer for the new XAML? That's definitely not going to happen. We don't have the resources for that at all. The other part is creating such projects, launching them, and that's a big maybe, because launching Metro applications and debugging them is surprisingly tricky, because you cannot just start the process, but you have to switch into the Metro environment. And there are some problems with the way Windows 8 suspends inactive Metro applications, which has some interesting effects on the debugger.
And that sounds like that's by experience and not by documentation. So do we have any documentation so far that we can rely on for doing stuff like this?
Well, I know about some documentation which goes as far as kind of packaging and launching of the Metro application goes, but the interesting part of actually debugging them is so far kind of a big mystery. The one thing that you can always do in Windows is, or what we would like to do, is just attach a debugger to a running process, or you can just launch a plain old executable with a debugger attached. Now the question is how easy this is going to be in Metro.
And obviously there was no documentation in the SDK, or at least enough documentation to really figure out how to do this, right?
Yeah, none that I know about.
Speaking of what's missing in the Windows SDK, there was a lot of brouhaha about there's no compiler in the Windows SDK. Although we clarified in the forum, I'd like to clarify it again. What's missing in the Windows SDK is the build environment for the command line C++ compiler. The C# and VB compilers, at the other hand, those ship in the runtime, just to clear up that misconception. However, there's one more thing missing in the Windows SDK, and that's the XML documentation for the framework itself. So, Daniel, I know we are using this for providing a pretty IntelliSense. So what's going to happen if those XML files don't ever show up somewhere? How are we going to deal with this?
Yeah, the current strategy in SharpDevelop is to use the XML files if they are installed in some way. We don't really care how they get installed. And if the file does not exist, we currently do not show any IntelliSense. But we plan to change that so that if the .NET 4.5 IntelliSense is not available, we will just use the files from .NET 4.0, and that way you can still get IntelliSense for the most methods, and you will just miss out on the documentation for the new stuff.
Yeah, sounds like someone should provide us with the XML documentation there. That would be quite nice. Now, I got one question here that keeps recurring, and we keep answering with a resounding no, is will there be a visual designer for ASP.NET? I think, looking around here, the answer is still a resounding no, right?
Right.
So, to clarify again, our route is for enterprise development, and this means ASP.NET MVC support. And for MVC, we don't need a visual designer, but rock-solid IntelliSense and other helpers. And that's what currently Matt is working on for version 4.3. He's currently working on MVC scaffolding, and you can count on having Razor code completion at some point in the future. So that's the route we take in the web world, going for the MVC, because, well, we like unit testing, and with MVC, unit testing is baked in. With ASP.NET Web Forms, on the other hand, it's not. So expect us to go the route MVC with Razor plus web APIs in SharpDevelop for our web development story. And talking about stories, let's switch over to David and talk a bit about the debugger in SharpDevelop, because there are also a couple of things going on. We're changing stuff around and questions coming up now and then. And let's start with the most popular one in our team here, x64 debugging.
Yeah, that's age-old question. So the reason that this hasn't been done yet, and why it just kind of keeps being delayed, is the difficulty of it. The way that x64 debugging needs to be done is that we need one more extra process, and we have to actually remote all debugging commands from SharpDevelop to the helper process, and the helper process is then going to debug the actual debugging. And it's this kind of communication layer between SharpDevelop and the helper process that's something that I am not way too keen to do anytime soon. It needs to be done, but it's a lot of work, and it's going to make everything tricky.
Yeah. Speaking of lots of work, we were talking yesterday in the ILSpy webcast on the idea of ReflexIL in ILSpy, and also you came up with the idea of, hey, how cool would it be to take the DLL, modify it, and then modify it on the fly and continue debugging this one, which brings me back to edit and continue in SharpDevelop.
Yes, it's the same thing, except in SharpDevelop it's plain old edit and continue. In ILSpy it would be edit and then continue together with the compilation, even more difficult. The good news is that there is someone working on that. Jan Mareš in Czech Republic. He's doing edit and continue for SharpDevelop as his dissertation topic. It's supposed to be finished in a few weeks' time, and at that point I'll join him and we'll try to actually make it work with the SharpDevelop 5.0.
Which, of course, has a couple of changes to the debugger infrastructure. Yes. And we thought it might be interesting to people who only use a debugger to get a better understanding how involved writing a debugger actually is. And David, why don't you share your instance of SharpDevelop, which has a non-compiling version of the debugger in it, which we are currently working on. We just took a break for the webcast to do just that, and show us around a few of the changes we made so we can use nRefactory 5 and get going with all the new goodness of SharpDevelop. So I see it loading already, and yes, it's here.
Yeah.
You might want to hide your taskbar so there's more screen real estate for people.
That would be way too difficult. Oh, there we go, a little bit larger.
And
So I'll start with the largest feature, or the most difficult one, which we're working at the moment, and that's the type system. The topic of our today's discussion has been the type system, the nRefactory 5.0, and the debugger is no exception. So one of the most involved tasks in debugging is actually trying to support the tooltips, local variables, and so on. And in order to do that, you have to know which fields you have, which properties you have, how they all link together, etc. So in order to do that, we have to read the .NET metadata. And when I started the debugger originally, there have been a few options. They are all still valid. It's just kind of shifted around which ones are more preferable. So the one that I've started with was just a thin COM wrapper. So when Microsoft started implementing .NET, they didn't have everything in C#. They'd written most of the code in C++, which I had to interact with using COM and somehow make use of it in C#. So I'll just show you some of how that works. Say this is reasonably simple. So this is the class that actually reads metadata from the disk, and it's COM class, which means that under the covers it's using the Microsoft C++ implementation, and we have things like get namespace, get variables, etc. Basically, this
Go to quickly the web task is
Oh.
taking a few seconds to catch
Okay,
up.
yep. I'll just not move anything for a while. So this is basically just dozens and dozens of functions which allow us access to C++. That was nice a few years ago. Nowadays we have Cecil and nRefactory, and that actually provides us purely managed type system. So what we are doing at the moment is trying to remove all of the dependencies on this old code base and trying to port it to nRefactory so that we have everything in managed code, which involves rewriting basically half of the debugger.
it sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. Would you like to go into some other complexities of the debuggers? There is plenty. I'll just point out one more interesting one. The most annoying complexity with COM is that everything has to be done on the main thread. So we cannot use any kind of move threading, and we have to marshal everything from the background thread where we have the calls dispatch to the main one, and that actually initially took something like month to make work. All the major difficulty of the debugger is that whenever you press continue or even just open up a property, the debugger will resume the process, which can in turn cause the garbage collection to run, which in turn can move everything in memory, which means that you cannot trust anything anytime.
Sounds like you had a lot of fun writing the debugger.
Yeah.
And will continue to have fun writing the debugger. And the debugger is also a topic we had yesterday in IL5, where we said, we might be deferring it. We don't ship it in the binaries, and we were a little coy on the reasons why we did that. And we had a discussion today on certain options of what we could do. And Daniel, would you outline the one option where we said, okay, we want to go away from code duplication and do something like a mega add-in for IL5?
Yeah, so the big problem with the existing ILSpy debugger was that it was basically a separate code base. It had several adjustments to ILSpy, and it ended up being difficult to maintain both of the SharpDevelop debugger and the ILSpy debugger. So our decision was to drop the ILSpy debugger, and instead we will offer a menu option in ILSpy. You can, within ILSpy, say start debugging this, and ILSpy will then prompt you to download SharpDevelop, but not the normal SharpDevelop installer, but we will provide a portable version that can be unzipped just as ILSpy is. And you can then use this version of SharpDevelop to debug decompiled code.
Which of course would give you all the nice paths like stack panels, etc.
Yeah.
So you get all the information you don't get today in ILSpy because SharpDevelop has all the infrastructure in place for multiple paths. We don't have Avalon Doc actually in ILSpy. So it would be always copy-paste, I understand, right?
Yeah.
And
There's one more, since we were talking about edit and continue, there is one more interesting point of this, is at the point when you actually open ILSpy and if you actually try to debug your application and start editing it, you'd start expecting certain features like code completion and tooltips and so on, and eventually you just expect the whole SharpDevelop, the whole integrated development environment to be available in ILSpy to help you edit your code. So there is a question where to put the boundary. And one option is just, yeah, if you want to debug, download SharpDevelop.
yes, do we have a timeline for this one? Or let's say, which version of SharpDevelop would we be using for this feature?
Well, the current version of SharpDevelop, which is the 4.2, already has the decompiler integrated in there. And it supports the debugging as well a little bit. At least it did last time I tried. But I still wouldn't recommend people to use that because it still needs a lot of polishing. So I think the first production-ready debugger, the decompilation support would be SharpDevelop 5.0. If I happen to make the debugger polished and fully featured much sooner than SharpDevelop 5.0, then I'll try to integrate it into ILSpy or somehow make it available.
Okay, that sounds like an interesting thing to integrate stuff early on. Integrating stuff is also one of the main topics we get lots of questions about. Hey, can you do feature X? And there's two things that come up regularly. That's for the EDM designer plus SharpDevelop reports. The question, hey, you're only supporting SQL Server as a database driver for the Database Explorer and all the database functionality. Please write a database provider for database X. Now, can you talk about the plans of database providers we are going to ship?
Yeah, we are currently shipping SQL Server support, and we are not planning to add anything else at the moment because we simply do not have the resources to work on that. We are already very busy with SharpDevelop 5.
Yeah, so to add to that, yes, you can look at the SQL Server provider. There's documentation out there from the student who initially wrote the EDM designer and the database infrastructure. So yes, you can provide database providers to us for, let's say, MySQL, PostgreSQL, etc. And we will happily either link to you or even include it in SharpDevelop. However, we won't get around to doing it. It's just like the question, can you please add support for the cool language of the day, language X, which I take we won't do anyways. Also.
Yeah, for adding new languages to SharpDevelop, which frequently comes up, I would like to add, we are a .NET development environment, and we aren't really interested to support non.NET languages, so you're on your own there. And for other .NET languages, we don't have the resources to add any additional ones. We even have problems maintaining the current ones, and SharpDevelop 5 may actually ship with fewer language bindings than SharpDevelop 4.
And Boo being the prime candidate for removal.
Yeah, Boo is a prime candidate for removal because it's the most complex one, would be the most work to adjust to the new nRefactory.
And the least user base so far. So if you're interested in Boo, you might want to take a look at the language binding and help us port it to the SharpDevelop 5 infrastructure. Talking about low-level infrastructure, let's come to the biggest change in SharpDevelop 5, which is nRefactory 5. We've been shipping nRefactory 5 in one form or another with various tools. Standalone, it's part of ILSpy. We have used it in certain features in SharpDevelop itself. I think code quality analysis was one of those. And we are cooperating with the mono developers, which is also nice to have a kind of sharing between different projects. And we have Mike here today from Xamarin. And he, together with Daniel, designed the system and is implementing the system. And we had nRefactory 5 as a big topic of last year's developer days already. And Daniel did a presentation on nRefactory 5 back then. And so I'd like to get started out with what has happened in the last year for nRefactory 5.
We have added refactoring support. Last year we hadn't support for code actions and code issues like we have now. So refactoring support did grow very big. We have a good foundation here to build refactorings. That was the most work last year, I think. And we did an update to the type system.
Yeah.
Daniel?
I can explain that more. I'm currently working on an explanation and overview of the new nRefactory, and I can show you a part of that unfinished article. We have a diagram that shows what we did to the type system. We had a very similar diagram in the presentation last year, which we also offered for download. But so now the big change is that we added this unresolved type system. Basically, splitting the type system into an unresolved and a resolved version allowed us to simplify the API of the resolved type system, which is used far more frequently. And so this makes code using nRefactory much easier. You do not always have to pass around a type resolved context and can simply use properties to access all the information.
However, we don't recommend using the unresolved type system from a user point of view. You should go and use AST for doing analysis of files.
Yeah, the unresolved type system should only be used in the process of constructing a resolved type system.
Just for clarification, I admit to not being deep down in nRefactory. What's resolved and unresolved for those not really deep into building such a system and more like interested in using it?
Yeah, so I'll explain it in the using a type reference as a concept. So in a resolved type system, the return type of a method would be actually a type like you are used to if you're using system reflection. So you can only get to the final type, whereas in the unresolved type system, you only get a reference to the type. For example, it might be a list of string, but you don't know what list is, and you would have to look it up, and you would have to provide some context for looking it up, like the list of usings. And only once you provide that context, you can know which type it actually is.
So actually, as a user, well, somebody doing stuff on the system, extending, let's say, SharpDevelop or MonoDevelop in that case, like for refactoring, you're going to use the AST or the resolve system.
Yes.
Okay. Please continue with the architecture. Sounds like it's an interesting piece of code.
Yeah, so we currently have the C# code which can be passed into an abstract syntax tree. This is really the big important thing, that we can represent the C# code, analyze it down to every last detail, including the tokens and comments in it, and have accurate positions for everything in the AST.
How does that compare to nRefactory 4? Because I'm seeing MCS here, and what are the big differences, only the really big ones, to the existing system in nRefactory 4?
Yeah, in nRefactory 4, we had a shared AST between C# and VB, and the problem is that while those languages look quite similar from the concepts they have, they actually, if you go into the details of the language specification, there are large differences how stuff is done in detail.
So you mean optional arguments to a method call?
Yeah, and also already stuff in the syntax, like the array creation syntax and so on. So you really need different ways to represent that syntax, and we, in the SharpDevelop 4 code base, we had a common syntax tree, but when you actually looked at the code interpreting that syntax tree, we basically almost all of the time had to do, if it's VB, do this, and if it's C#, do something else. And so it was made the API and the interpretation much easier if we just have C# and VB completely separate.
So that's a question mark and the other language box here. And that's also the reason why we said there's going to be a C#-centric preview version of SharpDevelop 5 first, because doing all the processing in this area is going to be much more complicated and a lot of work to get it going, right?
Yeah, so this other language is really any .NET language that you would want to integrate in SharpDevelop and have code completion. Then you need to integrate with this infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. And well, as we're sharing nRefactory with MonoDevelop, I take the entire picture here is the same on both sides. Is there anything else we are sharing between SharpDevelop and MonoDevelop?
The refactorings, we are sharing the refactoring infrastructure, little code actions like create property or remove baking store and something like this. We are sharing the find all references.
And code completion.
And code completion, yes.
And plans for more cooperation?
We try to cooperate in any way we can. We are both small teams developing an IDE, and we don't compete. It's beneficial for us both to work together, and I think we will collaborate more in the future.
Yeah,
sounds like
it's a lot of work, because at least one of us has to rewrite a lot of stuff to move to the common API, and if we really redesign a clean API, then both of us have to do that work.
It was much work to do it in MonoDevelop. We have already done the report to nRefactory 5. Our latest release contains it. It was really much work, and we also didn't move to the Boo binding and other language bindings other than C# to the nRefactory. That's too much to work.
So yes, it will take a little bit time on our end too.
Yes, but the Boo binding wasn't really used in MonoDevelop. It was broken all the time.
Mm-hmm. Actually, do we have any usage data on stuff like this? How many users are using a certain feature? Can you show us like the usage data for SharpDevelop, so people get an idea what's going on and what drives our decisions, which features to pick first for migration, or where to spend some effort to get going? Well, and we have a tool for that, and Daniel will show it in a minute. That's the so-called UDC, the Usage Data Collector, which is actually a website plus a web service that takes usage data from the client. The client library is free to use for everyone, so you can use the code from our project in your C# applications. You don't need to splash down money for any of the commercial offerings that do usage data collection. You can actually take our client-side DLL plus our server-side services and MVC website, to do what you're seeing now for your own projects. So Daniel, let's discuss a few of the things we see here on the screen.
Yeah, you've probably noticed already when you started SharpDevelop first, the start page was asking you to contribute data to our usage data collection. So what are we actually collecting? Well, first of all, we are interested in how many people are using SharpDevelop at all and which versions are they still using. So that's what you can see here. These numbers only show the users who actually have this feature enabled, and we have no data at all on all the other users.
Yes, because that's really important. We don't collect anything or send anything unless you really check it and say OK on the start page.
Yeah. So, yeah, apart from the actual number of users, we are collecting some environment data like your operating system and your architecture. So you can see that the number of users on 64-bit operating systems are nicely increased in the past year. And yeah, we can use this to see that there were still about 20% users of Windows XP.
And it's steadily declining, so that's why we think that once we are done with SharpDevelop 5, that number will have dwindled even further. So there are not too many people who will have to stay on the old version 4.
Yes. And
show the process account. It's kind of fun to see how many processes people have in their machines. So let's see, not too many with 24 processes, but still there are some.
Yeah, so this is counting virtual processors due to hyper-threading as well.
Oh, the hyper-threading kernels also. So modern processors should be 16. And what are not too many of the quad-core machines in here? Yeah, but still nice numbers.
I think most quad cores should be 8 due to dual hyper-threading.
Depending on what you have. Let's switch just for quickly showing it off why it's really important for us. The crashes.
The crashes, yeah. So we have an overview of the stability of SharpDevelop, which is just collecting relative frequency of crashes. So you can see here that
don't scroll so much, please.
Yeah, that the version 4.2 beta 1 was a outlier which had a really nasty crash which affected almost everyone. And yeah, we've been relatively stable since then. Of course, 4.2.1 was only released a few days ago, and we don't really have much data yet, so that number is mostly random so far, because there's also a few days delay until the data is finally uploaded.
Yeah, sure.
And then, of course, important are the details of the exceptions, where we can actually see which crashes are most common, and see the stack trace and how many users are affected. So this data really tells us what to fix next.
And I'd like to point out the stack trace data is cleaned on your machine before it's sent to our servers. So there's no project details or anything in there.
Yeah, we only send the stack trace, and we don't send the exception message because that might contain your project name or whatever, a file that could not be accessed. We don't, and if you saw an exception in our error reporting box, there is this nice log message which has all kind of important information, but also frequently your private data like project names or so. So we do not send that data. We only send the tiny stack trace and nothing else. So please still keep reporting bugs to us, because we frequently cannot act on the stack trace alone. So this is just to show us which of the reported bugs is the most important, affects the most people.
So yes, please use the forum to report bugs, and please provide reproduction steps so we can more easily and quickly come up with a solution for the problem. Yeah. And that was just a short demo to show you, yes, the data you send by automated reporting is being used to improve SharpDevelop. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel, for showing this off. And with that, I think we are almost at the end of our webcast for the questions we had. And we've been doing a lot of separate tools lately, like nRefactory, ILSpy, and those we're using a different license than we have been using so far. SharpDevelop is all LGPL, and ILSpy, the new code, is all MIT, and nRefactory 5 is also MIT. And we thought it might be an interesting point in time to announce that coming SharpDevelop 5 beta, the entire SharpDevelop code base will be moved to MIT license. And just to clarify, really only the SharpDevelop 5 code base going forward with the beta, not 4.3 or anything else, or SharpDevelop 5 in its current development state. This will be at the day we ship the beta. So as a small nugget, this is going to happen in the future. We are not going to promise a time frame, like always, because we're doing it in our spare time. But coming SharpDevelop 5 beta, the entire SharpDevelop will be MIT licensed, which means there's no longer a need to submit a JCA, a Joint Copyright Assignment. You only need to create a request on GitHub, and we can take your source code immediately. So we think this is a really nice boon and will help ease you helping us.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that this is actually made possible because we had the Joint Copyright Assignments in the first place, just in case.
Yes, this really helped us for the past liberalizations of our license, when we switched from GPL to LGPL and now from LGPL to MIT. Without the JCAs, this wouldn't have been possible at all. Well, that's now almost 45 minutes of a webcast. I think we've covered lots of ground in SharpDevelop 4 and SharpDevelop 5, development changes, cooperation with MonoDevelop, where we are going, where we are expecting problems, where you won't see us doing the work, and maybe someone might come and help us in this area. And with that, I'd like to say thanks to all the participants in this webcast, to the team members who took their time off from coding. And with that, thank you, good evening, and see you the next time around.